Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish. I have a really interesting topic today. We're talking about AWS security in a heavily regulated enterprise. I've got someone special here for it. For people who haven't been here before, this is also part of the Cloud Security podcast. You should see the podcast link up here at the bottom. And that's the topic for today. Each week we talk with a cloud practitioner. So tune into our YouTube or LinkedIn to get more insight about what we talk about, which is application security, cloud security, basically anything and everything in cloud. So without further ado, let me bring my friend, and here we go. Hey, Houston, how are we?
Hey, good to see you, Ashish.
Good to see you. Oh, perfect. Welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you here because for two reasons. One, you have a really cool background of is that a skateboard in the background?
Of course, yeah.
Oh, nice. Is that and Kevin? That's not Keanu Reeves, is it?
No, it's a Clint Eastwood graphic from. It's a remake of an old board from Pal Peralta. So there was Frankie Hill. So it's a classic.
Oh, there you go. I'm gonna go dig deep into it as well. But welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here, man. I think it's really. I've been talking to you offline for some time, and we've met in person as well. So I'm so excited to have you, and I can't wait for everyone else to meet you. But I think I didn't mention the coffee part. Do you have a drink with you? I totally forgot to check that. Perfect. Cheers. I'm like, so what's your coffee for sure? I'm gonna start with a bit more about yourself because we'll get live audiences coming in and asking for a question. You should be able to see it on the screen. The first question is more around about yourself for people who may not know of Houston. How'd you get into cybersecurity?
So I think we could take a whole hour to talk about.
Yeah.
So kind of a bridge version is. Have a really good friend, Tony Laura, who works at Akamai, by the way, and he's made a career for himself as well. But Tony and I grew up skateboarding together, and Tony got interested in hacking, and I thought it was really strange at the time, right? I thought like, why would he waste his vacation to go sit in the desert with a bunch of hackers, right? Like I just thought it was so strange. But fast forward a few years, and I got into it as well. We ended up working at the same call center. We had a lot of hijinks at the call center, we'll say. And then these were back in the days of like back orifice and loft crack and messing with things. So I got interested then. And then, Tony and I had always stayed in touch, and we ended up ultimately working together after doing a little bit of hacking of our own. Just, learning things. This is back in the days when Backtrack was still new. And
right.
We were doing a lot of offensive security things, just learning how things worked. And we both had experience from our jobs. So parlayed into an actual security gig, I guess. I started out in identity management. I think I share that with you as well. So
yes.
Identity management background, security administration, and then moved over into kind of like building defensive mechanisms around infrastructure. So a bit of architecture, Active Directory, all those things that you get inside of a big company. So I was working at a Fortune 50 at the time and saw really, really interesting things. And then after a very long while, 11 years at that company, I pivoted to a startup. And from there, I got to run everything inside and out from the security side. And I worked directly with Tony again, my friend Tony. So here we were at this startup. It was a mobile payments startup. And it was super interesting. We did everything from the product security side. We learned all about NFC, and we were, knee deep in various RFCs about secure enclaves, et cetera. But we were also like doing everything like manning the door, like we were watching to see who didn't badge in. Like when you're in a startup, you kind of run the whole thing. And I built a centralized identity and access management program there that had a lot of good segmentation and isolation built into it.
Yep.
But then same time, we did a lot of hacking there too. So it was fun.
Nice.
And got some taste of automation in my previous job and really pulled it over, tried to use it at the startup. But you think most startups back then, this was 2012, 2013.
Right.
You would think you'd start hearing about cloud more, but there wasn't a lot of like DevOps talk, at this particular company. The other thing with startups is you'll find like they like to write off their expenses for servers, and they have the ways that they handle operational expenses is really interesting.
Yeah.
So we didn't have a lot of cloudy things there, but I was at the time really getting my feet wet into the whole concept of DevOps, which had kind of evolved
Right.
From server automation and systems automation and process automation, all these things we used to call it, and then it got a really cool name like DevOps. And I always loved the idea of building security in a way that was easier, and I always thought DevOps offered that opportunity. I think early, it's fun because I'm friends with Rich Mogul now, but I remember listening to the Network Security podcast many years ago, and like hear him talk about like, oh, you don't have to patch. You just cycle in a pre-built instance. I was like, that's perfect. Like, so where have we been? Anyways, parlayed from that startup over into what I would call a growth company that had a financial twist.
Yeah.
And was one of 3 consultants there, main consultants, and we were basically whatever security function any one of the 6 CISOs that we consulted for needed. They would drop us in on a parachute and say, hey, come help build a vulnerability management program, or help run a red team, or help build our SIM. Can you help us with some detection? It was everything. So it was basically, we had to be not only a mile wide, but a mile deep. So it was a really cool experience. Still some of my best friends were those other consultants I worked with there. We're all spread out again, and this team but really great people, lots of great experience there. And then made my way over to Capital One specifically because they were doing crazy cloud stuff. And I was super excited to hear like, here's a big enterprise that's going head into cloud, because most of my experience had been Azure before that, but not a complete replacement for a data center. And then some of the other, that was for infrastructure as a service, but I did things with like Box.com, for an enterprise, lots of SASE type things, right? SaaS stuff. So going to Capital One and trying to figure out, I remember I used some point in that previous role, I started getting into threat intelligence, which is a weird thing to call it, but just really getting into the defense side of network security and just security in general. Made a lot of great friends through various trust groups and ISACs, et cetera. So anyways, this is supposed to be the abridged version. I went to Capital One to get into a little bit more. And then really just see what was going on with modern software development, because on the inside, it's a software company, right? Like they're building lots of interesting things. They have a team of developers at their resources. So
that's what I find fascinating about Capital One, that, you know, people kind of always think of Capital One as a bank, but it's technically, like, I hear so many software initiatives over there, like the cloud custodian and a lot of the other things that are being released publicly. And you're like, but that's a bank. Yeah. And to your point, so, I mean, and going back to the episode, it's a large regulated enterprise, which is really interesting because you always imagine that it would have to be a super fast startup that's doing all this and releasing open sources and like moving into the cloud. But I was really fascinated. I think the first time I heard about cloud journey from Capital One was during an AWS reInvent talk. And someone from Capital One's talking about how the journey went and how everything was. I'm like, this is so cool. I can't imagine. And this is like, by the way, this is before the rest of the world is going, we are ready for cloud.
Yeah.
I mean, Capital was already doing this. Probably, I mean, am I right in saying probably one of the first few banks to kind of move into this space, like fully move into the AWS space?
Yeah, I would say that we qualify as one of the early banks to go all in on the cloud. So I don't think it's, we started quite a while ago, right? Like we didn't come with the beginning of cloud. We weren't like 2009 AWS people, but we, you know, before I joined Capital One, they were already really getting their feet wet. But I've seen it go from, you know, maybe 20-30% to near 100% of our stuff runs in the cloud. I think you had Caleb on last week talking.
Yeah, I was going to say, because Caleb did mention, because Caleb said by the time he came in, Capital One was already 30% in. And by the time he left, it was already 70 to 80%. And I'm like, wow, okay, there you go. So I feel like that comes with a challenge as well, because Capital One being such an old organization, and when I say old, not in terms of age, but more in terms of the legacy that it has for technology.
Yeah.
Coming from, I imagine there's a mainframe and there's like on-prem, which has been there for 20 plus years. right? So what's the
it's just a bold move, and with all kind of digital transformation, no matter what your company is, right? Like it takes from the top down leadership buy-in, right? So I think the interesting part when I talk to my colleagues at maybe other companies is the struggle that they might have for, hey, I'm trying to convince my leaders that DevOps isn't a fad, or that cloud isn't a fad, or that cloud needs to be, cloud's not just, wrought with security issues. And I think it just seemed to me, I'm very, very spoiled, right? I'm in a company that has a mission that understands this a lot better than maybe some other people in the same legacy. But again, I think if I had that conversation in 2015, right, it would be one way. But it's 2020, and I think everybody's pretty close to getting into the cloud. They either know they're in the cloud or they don't know that they're in the cloud already, right? It's like one of those scenarios. So it's not the huge differentiator that it was at one time. But I think the fact that our mission is great, because it is cloud is a heavy part of everything that we do. It's actually just it's part of what we do. It's not even something we necessarily think about.
Right, and to your point, as someone who's listening into this, and I'm sure some of the other banks or regular industries are listening to this, and what are the immediate security challenges that, and you don't have to list out all of them, come some of the top few that you think of that people should consider when moving from, say, a traditional regulated enterprise, or I guess, like a hybrid world that you're trying to create for yourself. What are the immediate security challenges that you see for a regulated enterprise?
I honestly, I think, living in the hybrid world, there's actually additional risk, right? If you're saying, hey, I'm kind of over here and I'm kind of in the cloud, because you got to know both things. You got to really understand how those two things interconnect, right? So once you have, it takes a lot of wiring, I guess. It's virtual wiring. In most cases, there is a little bit of physical wiring as well. But as you approach more and more to holistically being in one environment or the other, and I would say if you're moving towards cloud, things get a little more clear, right? Because then you say, I'm really focused on the way I can operate in this infrastructure, or in this particular environment, and it's refreshing to finally get there. But I would say, the challenges you're up for immediately is just saying, like, hey, my traditional world, maybe everything was controlled with an LDAP system, right? My LDAP system provided who has access controls to X, Y, and Z. How does that translate when we're talking about the cloud world, right? And just understanding, I always think that the greatest thing, and what has been incredible in my journey, right, and very humbling from how I thought things worked in the beginning, and I always say this, how I thought things worked yesterday versus what I know today. I'm always very humbled to learn more. But just kind of taking that general, like, here's how things have traditionally worked inside of an enterprise, and here's how that translates to cloud. It's not necessarily different, but sometimes it takes a little bit of mapping to get there, right? So it's I'm not saying it's the same. Like, I'm not one of those people that would the cloud is somebody else's computer. It's not untrue, but it's so much deeper than that, just because of the way that it is actually I don't remember who I can quote with this one, but saying the cloud is an operating system is way closer to reality. It's got its own nuance. In fact, I think that's a much better representation. You're trying to change your operating system mechanism. Like, you're leaving your world of standard data center operating system to cloud operating system, and you've got to rewire a few things. But conceptually, a lot of stuff is the same. They're different risks. You have to address them different ways. But I would say the one thing, though, in that hybrid world, is really starting to ramp up your associates. It's about changing that mindset, finding the people that are willing to come along that journey. There's a lot of people that just aren't, right? Some people, the way it worked before, like, they feel they have some they're beholden to the way things were before. And I'm not saying that's even bad, but you need to find who's ready to go on this journey with you, and then find and hire people that are willing to take that challenge, because it will be challenging for quite a while. And as far as I know, we're going to be employed for as long as I can see. Because there is a constant stream of challenges, constant stream of new services, new clouds. It's
I definitely want to get into some of the new cloud challenges as well. We've got questions coming in, and I think you should be able to see it on your comments thing as well. A few people, hey, morning, Arun, morning, Vinny. So Arun has an interesting question. Do you prefer to use AWS native tools for security observability or a vendor product?
This is a really good question, right? It's actually strange. I could have anticipated this question. I actually think I thought of like, hey, I wonder if anyone's going to ask or how deep we want to go on this.
Yeah.
I think I have some unique experience of being involved in cloud for at least the last 5 years. And I would say that if you would have asked me this question 5 years ago, I don't think we had all the tools we really wanted. But I think every year the native tools get better and better. So depending on your size, I would start there. Figure out what the native tools don't offer you. I also say I'm a huge fan of where things are headed in the vendor marketplace. Like I see a lot of great products coming out. I think they're all worth a try. I think you should always have some openness to experimenting with the vendor tools to see what they solve and what they don't, right? So, I'm a fan of like short-term contracts with different people or paid POCs to where you can really dig in. But I've seen the native tools go from basically nothing to amazing. And that being said, if you just have CloudTrail, you got a lot. If we're talking AWS, right? So CloudTrail itself, once you learn how to mine it, learn what it's telling you, you have the ability to aggregate it. It can go a long way. And then some of the tools that the cloud providers are offering on top of their logging services for additional information. I mean, they're all doing great things now, but I would say start with the native tools, see what they can do for you. You will find, I mean, once you dig in and you get intimate with any of them, there are going to be things that annoy you. I will say by and large, the things that we find that annoy us about the native products, some of the pay-for products don't solve that problem, right? They're not making that problem any easier. So it really helps to know, to help build your requirements, right, for what tools you need. Everybody's trying to solve some of the same problems, and a lot of people just haven't got there yet.
All right, and I think he's got a follow-up comment on that, which probably is a great segue, which is large enterprise may also have a large number of accounts using vendor products and integrity. So integrating, consolidating all accounts may be challenging as well. I mean, yeah, and that kind of, I've got another question that I want to attach to this, where the challenges of scale from a security perspective, which I think that's what he's referring to as well. Whether you choose the native path or you go to the vendor path, after a point, you need something which is scalable. And I guess to your point about the challenges with native tools, sometimes I think is guard duty is still per region, and there are challenges. You're almost like it should be per account. Like, why would you not do that? Why would you not consolidate everything in one place? And keen to know your thoughts on the challenges of scale that you come across as well. If you want to comment on that as well first, feel free to do that.
And they're tied hand in hand. I love this question just because I think I've actually seen my pendulum swing back and forth on this answer all the time, but I think it's something you have to consider depending on your size, right? I think part of me has seen such incredible advancements with AWS organizations, right? In the different ways you can do stuff. If you're starting out fresh, you have Control Tower and some other things you can really dig into to help kind of, it sounds silly to say, but like cookie cutter, stamp out accounts and do things in a way from the beginning. I'm also coming from a place that didn't have those tools, right? We didn't start there. They were not available when we built things. And thus tools like Cloud Custodian were born to help us manage the fleet. And Custodian's now very mature. There's other tools that do very similar things, but I think once you get a certain size, you can look at things two ways, right? You can, I think an account question, how many AWS accounts you need. I've always thought of that as an IAM question, right? So it's how granular do you want to go with all of your IAM roles for that specific account? And this gets really interesting because there's no simple answer, of course, but if you're saying I have these 15 roles and I'm going to stamp out an account for these 15 roles. If there's something that challenges the trust boundary between the people using that, I put that in another account. They have the same 15 roles and we don't mix them together. And so you can really end up with thousands of accounts, and many companies are doing that. And I think it's probably the best practice right now is to go smaller and smaller accounts to keep your IAM granularity where it should be. I think there's a challenge though, and that it goes back to what we were talking about with things like Guard Duty or even CloudTrail or things that when you're just starting out, it's kind of hard enough to wrap your mind around just getting it from one place.
Yeah.
We're having to aggregate from all these different regions and all these different VPCs and all these different accounts and get them into one place. And it's doable. Like there's an industry of people who've done it, but it takes some time and expertise and tweaking. And by the way, even us who think we're good at this find out new things all the time.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's just, be prepared. I think there's no simple answer, right? But I also say like, yeah, we have a tremendous number of accounts. It's growing dramatically. And the world, I think we've seen this in the world across all of AWS specifically, is this move towards smaller and smaller accounts to really say this is per application or per team or per environment. Maybe you even have an account, for this particular test. If you've gotten really good at spinning up and spinning down accounts, I think the spinning down accounts is a whole other topic.
Yep, you can't even delete accounts. Yeah, yep.
Yeah, talk to Ian about that stuff, right?
Yes,
yes. All the tricks and stuff he had to do to get accounts to disappear.
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely part of the challenge, right? So figuring out how big your size is, how you want to divide that up. I would always say challenge yourself. If you have the ability, to decide for yourself, you're going to build your own tool suite. You have some freedom. If you're looking into a specific vendor, they may guide you on like, hey, this is how the kind of size you need to help.
Yeah.
You use those resources effectively. By the way, I think it's just a shift. I think you could do one huge account and still do it safely, as scary as that sounds, but you're going to be really granular with IAM. You're going to be very, very specific. And AWS is giving us the power more and more every day to do. If you wanted to go that route, you can get really granular with IAM, right? And it's beautiful. It's great to have that choice.
Yeah, and I think coming from an identity background, maybe you and I have a bit of bias, but how does accountability work? You know how one of the pillars of identity is also more like, it's great that you have a resource or a server. Is accountability a challenge as well at scale?
It always has been. So yeah. Accountability is interesting. And the way I think of it in the cloud world is really paying attention to the identity that your resources take on it's not a human, right? I can't necessarily point at Ashish and say, hey, this was you. I can say this was the server that this team runs.
Yep.
And so I think it's critically important to think about some of these cool new concepts. Like when you get into cloud, it's like immutability, because it matters. If you're running systems that aren't immutable, you're going to challenge accountability, because if you have someone who say SSHs into an EC2 instance, starts executing AWS commands, it's going to show as the running role on the instance, which is not the same as the user executing the logged into SSH, which is there is the accountability can be traced there with the right logs, right? You map things back, you can tell who did it, but it's not easy, and a lot of people aren't doing it. And it takes some lessons learned before you start knowing you have to do that mapping. Or even to understand that that's a thing, right? Like,
and I didn't want to cut you off, but I was going to just add to that, where accountability is kind of one of those concepts which is kind of slowly, I feel it's evolving in the cloud world, where it's great that we have an insight into how many EC2 instances and all that. But sometimes you lose that fact that, Houston had 20 EC2 instances that he was running, but they were on yesterday, not on today. So I guess he's not the owner anymore, so he doesn't have accountability. And you're like, I find that really fascinating.
Yeah, who's challenged by this is a lot of the vendors that have great products that worked really great historically to map the internet and show you what everything looked like from the outside. They're extremely challenged to do that for companies now because of the ephemeral nature of how things spin up and spin down. But it's really interesting. It actually makes me think like accountability is a big term, right? We could probably go really deep into it. And there's challenges that arise and you have to really pay attention inside a cloud from a portability perspective of your credentials, right? So suddenly you're dealing with credentials that you have to be very, very detailed in controls to make sure that you can't just take that credential to some other part of the world and use it. Or and you have to make a conscious risk decision to say, do we want to stop someone from doing that, or is that part of the way we do business, or do we just want to know if someone does it and try to figure out why? And I think those accountability challenges end up spawning more challenges, because then you're dealing with the speed of cloud problem, which is really bleeding into part of this like detection stuff, right? So detection versus prevention, and it's fun.
I would love to kind of explore that as well, and probably a good way to start that probably is also when you're trying to do security across a large landscape of whether it's AWS or anything. How do you go? Like, is your approach to standardize security, which is what a lot of people do, or is it more like, I mean, what's the alternate, I guess?
Again, these are fun ideas, right? And it really depends on your risk tolerance of your organization and the size. I think I come from a history of some threat intelligence, and I think about like trust groups, and we often talk about how as the size of our groups go up, the amount of trust goes down, right? They work inversely. And I think likewise, if you look at your environment with the number of associates that you might have, or number of developers or engineers that are working in AWS, if you're a small shop with 10 people, you probably know those 10 people very well. And if one person messes up, like you can hold them accountable. If you're in a shop with, a couple of hundred, or, maybe getting near 100, those numbers get interesting, right? Because suddenly you don't know everybody, when they're working, what they're doing. You have a lot bigger footprint to cover, and there's tooling and visibility to help you with that stuff. But I think I lost my train of thought, which is normal.
No, that's okay. We're talking about I guess standardizing across multiple cloud, or I didn't even go to multiple clouds, but I mean multiple clouds is another one. But
so yeah, I gotcha. And so I think I'm a fan of guardrails, right? Is how, and I think sometimes that term gets overused, but I specifically mean you need to allow people enough freedom to be creative and to challenge what to be innovative, right? Try something new. Here's a thing. We've got to figure out how it works. And you need to give them some leeway to allow those things to happen, to test, to see what you know and love. But at the same time, you need to put the appropriate guardrails on. But my favorite guardrails are the things that do not impact the way the person operates, right? So find some really service control policies are a great place to start playing with this idea, but like using your service control policies effectively to apply those guardrails across your organization. My favorite ones are like, reducing the regions that you operate in, right? So region restriction on your SCPs, an SCP for that across all your accounts, because you don't necessarily need to operate in regions that you don't operate in, right? And monitor Brazil if I'm not in Brazil, or and so that's a really interesting guardrail that now narrows your threat landscape, narrows your attack surfaces, if you will. And so then you can kind of focus in. And so it's not like traditional, like saying, hey, I'm telling you can't do this thing, but I'm saying you can't do it there because it's really, really difficult to monitor everything everywhere all the time, right?
Yeah.
But by and large, if you're not, like, someone would only spin something up in that region, probably on accident. They weren't paying attention to where they were in the console, or like maybe that I can't think of why this happens. I could never fathom all the cases, but I guarantee you it does. People spin stuff up in random regions, and you're like,
yeah. I mean, I guess so. To your point, the simplest example is every time you sign up for AWS, it takes you all to North Virginia region, right? But so imagine if someone from Australia is going in there. We also get North Virginia as the first thing, but we kind of have to switch over to Sydney. And anyone who's working in a space where data sovereignty is a question, that data cannot be hanging around anywhere outside Australia, suddenly you're like, without even knowing it, you've created something in North Virginia.
Yeah, I bet that happens way more. I never thought of, like, I guess I'm the spoiled American in this example.
No.
We default to America.
Yeah.
And actually, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure like new stuff defaults to Ohio, which is like US East 2. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, or maybe I'm just dreaming that.
No, you could be right, because that's where identity is hosted. But I think going back to what you were saying earlier as well, the trust group kind of is still reducing, and if you can do some things which are not blocking someone from doing their day-to-day, like to your point, if you don't need to be in, say, the European region, then unless you have a really solid business case for it, just because there's a new service there, but doesn't really mean you should just, I'm going to switch on something in the European region. To your point, the trust level is quite low at that scale.
Yeah.
And I was going to say sorry, go on.
No, I'm going to let you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say with the detection stuff that you mentioned, and I've been a fan of prevention. Unfortunately, I don't feel there is prevention enough in the space, but I don't know what your thoughts are on detection and prevention in a cloud landscape. Can't you hear that?
So this is probably I love this question. It's probably one of my favorite topics in general. And within the cloud security community, we have these discussions all the time, which is great. Colleagues across many places, and I think what's really interesting is you need both, of course. Like nothing's changed from anything we've seen in the past, but I think what's interesting with cloud is oftentimes I find it's easier to do prevention than it is to do detection. And it sounds so bizarre because it's always been the opposite. And I think even in our mindset, we're always like, well, can we detect it? Okay, cool. That mitigates, so much of the risk. We'll know if it happens. And I'm like, but look, we can actually just click this button and prevent it, right? And I think there's still a natural fear of like prevention means someone can't do something that they need to do. And so it's all about being very strategic and testing things, and oftentimes challenging yourself and challenging the outliers, right? If you're testing a scenario where you need to put in a preventative control, and that preventative control is relatively easy to do, but it's going to disrupt this one outlier. Go figure out what that outlier is doing. Figure out a way to allow them to continue to do what they're doing, but not, break down the guardrail for everyone else. And we've had a lot, I've seen our community have a lot of success approaching things that way. There's the legacy security vibe that people come in and say no. It's a security guy. It's going to come in and say no. And I think there's a John from the Phoenix Project. Like it's just the people who aren't all about challenging things, and they're stressed out and they're drinking and disappear. And I think we've all been there. But I still feel like security as an enabler is still the goal. But sometimes, like, you're always going to be put into a conversation where it's not that way. And I think that's where you start having that detection and prevention discussion. Is look, if I fully believe detection is there to tell you whether your preventative control succeeded or not. Sometimes maybe you can't get the preventative control because you have a dependency on a thing, but you have to build the detective control. So this is a fun topic. I'm probably not going to tell you anything you don't know. But
no. And I think to also your point earlier, you can't really predict all the prevention steps as well. It's just like, it's like predicting 0 days when a 0 day is going to come in, and you're like, yeah, I know exactly when a 0 day is coming in, so I could. You just cannot. There is no way. And to your point, I love the example that you had given earlier about switching off regions. That's a great guardrail, which to your point is a preventative as well. It's you can prevent yourself from, I guess, getting exposed in regions where you shouldn't be. I think Paul kind of mentioned an interesting thing over here where, not to mention that many services are centered in US East 1, Cloudfront, Workmail are examples. So just the use of these services mean you're breaking the sovereignty barrier already. It's a great point again, because probably for anyone who's listening, then suddenly, if they decide to use a service, probably should check where the service is hosted.
Yeah, I would say that those are great examples, and it doesn't matter where you live. There's some sovereignty needs, right? Especially if whatever companies you operate in, you're beholden to their regulatory means. So we have to think about that quite frequently. Cloudfront is an interesting one, right? It's a very useful service. It's very simple to use,
Yeah.
but it's not the most granular service out there, right? If you're going to choose where to serve your Cloudfront data or where to cache it, you have like a couple of checkboxes you can hit, and they're like US. I don't even remember what they are, but it's something like US and Canada, and then it's like US in Europe or North America and Europe, and then it's like everywhere. Turns out like everywhere means everywhere but China, but there's a lot of really interesting conversations going on about Hong Kong region right now because in Taiwan, like we don't know, those are not considered part of China. So you really have to think about it. It makes for a lot of cool investigations. By the way, it's not, no one's born knowing that. You have to go look it up and figure it out.
And please don't ask this in an interview to a person who might come for an interview, and suddenly you're like, I find that really fascinating sometimes. And people would ask questions in interviews where you almost feel like they should know all AWS services. They should be up to date in what happened this morning. Do you feel I mean, obviously you have a team around you and you see other people talk about cloud as well. Do you feel that's a pressure that our community kind of creates? Like, to your point about different region, different locations, like, how do you even like keep track of this? Like, what's your strategy with this? Like, how do you keep a track of this? I mean, because it's not that you don't have your own full-time job already, but on top of that, you kind of have to like, oh wait, 30 services got released by AWS yesterday. 30 services got released by Azure yesterday. What's your strategy with that?
I would caution anyone in the world to not be like me, right? So I'd say that what I have is closer to a sickness, right? To try to, and maybe it's born out of imposter syndrome, and maybe that's a whole other podcast. But it's hard to keep up. And people who know me know I try my best. But also the things, the fire hose that's fed to us of new, not even new services, but changes like suddenly you can share all the network changes from 2018 in AWS. Man, I'm still catching up, right? Like you can share VPCs, and now you got, I can't even think of all the acronyms for all the little switches you can do now for the networking changes, right? Or maybe it's hypervisor for Lambda or hyperplane for Lambda. Like
I think Lambda and Edge,
Yeah, and then Lambda and Edge is a whole other one. Like it's like I kind of understand most of these things. I will say that following the right people on Twitter makes a difference. Follow Aiden. Like follow the people that just toy with this stuff all the time. I don't know when Aiden sleeps, right? So
really?
Yeah, he's always toying with something. Ian is toying with stuff. Like Scott Piper. Like try to pay attention to what they're doing. Often they're doing your service evaluation for you.
Yep.
They're going to break down where things are broken. Spencer Geidson's another great one, right? So finding the people in the community that are constantly pressure testing every product that's released by the cloud providers. I know there's been a lot of talk lately about finding who's the Scott Piper equivalent for Cloud X. We need that. We need to find them because I need people that can give us perspective on Azure, GCP, Salesforce, Alibaba. I want to know it all, but I think, and plus I'm extremely fortunate to have a very good team of people. Both that work on my team, work for me, and I have other people that I surround myself with inside my office, outside my office, inside my home even, and so we try to keep up that way. No one's perfect. It is tough because you feel the pressure. I think I often think about this a lot because there's just certain services I've never used. I've never. Either because I have no need to use them, or maybe because I've never worked at a place where those were services that we thought were good enough to use yet. Or we had some competing service that meant we didn't need that service. But they're all super interesting. And then I hear people will talk about them, and I'm like, whoa, there's a thing that does that? But I know we're not alone. I'm on every possible medium for this stuff, right? So Reddit has a really great community for talking about cloud security stuff, AWS security. There's Slack channels. There's trying to keep up at the conference circuit. It is impossible. I would just say like you're never gonna. I don't think people that work at AWS that invent these services even fully understand them right away. Right? It takes time. So.
And just the scale of it as well, right? I mean, you kind of have to boil it down to you're an individual, And at that point, but AWS has teams dedicated for services.
Yeah.
And I guess most of us who are listening to this and trying to solve this for our companies or for our businesses or for our products, we have a goal in mind, right? We're not trying to do AWS as a business. They basically have a team dedicated for each of the services, which are just constantly producing stuff. So there's no realistic way to put yourself under the microscope and go, I need to be aware of all the services coming out, because I need to be able to go, because how often would you actually migrate everything? And we haven't even gone into technology yet. We have containers, we have serverless, we have EC2 instances, and now if you add another barrier for Azure, GCP, or Alibaba, and you're like, the complexity that comes with it, I feel it's impossible. And I'm really glad you mentioned Scott Piper and other people as well. I definitely recommend people following these people, because they definitely make you challenge the thought. They're not, I guess, drinking the Kool-Aid, I guess, for lack of a better word, just because it's being sold.
Yeah, and honestly, that I should tell the story of like how I got into cloud. Like when I first started really challenging it. Honestly, I saw Dagger's talk. So Daniel Gazelic gave a talk. He was in Austin, Texas.
All right.
And I think the talk was like the next big breach, right? And it was about the way cross-account assume role access works and how it's funny because Keston Broughton has now given a very similar talk years later, and some of the problems still exist, but essentially how we allow certain vendors cross-account assume role access into our AWS environments, right, as a whole.
Yep.
And they might see 100, 200 different companies, and they have access to all of them. What if that person gets popped, and like what is the exponential side of that access? And I remember listening to Dan talk, and I was like, oh my god, like I just what am I looking at? And the funny part was I remember messaging Kapil and being like, is this possible? And Kapil's like, yeah, I think that's possible. Like it just opened our eyes into like this whole other side of like how we need to think about these things. And luckily this was years ago, right? I think it was 2016. I gave the talk at KiwiCon. There's a horrible version of it on YouTube where somebody filmed it from the crowd. But Dan got me interested in like challenging some of that Kool-Aid. And I remember getting to the point of like started thinking about credential portability right off the bat. And came across Piper, right? So came across Scott, and I came across Eric Peterson, who ex-Veracode, and now runs Cloud Zero.
Right.
I don't know. It's a cost ops company. It's really cool. Serverless cost ops company. But back when he was at Veracode, he gave this really great talk, like bringing an Apache to the Amazon, something like that, or bringing a hatchet. I don't know what it is. Some kind of bringing a machete to the Amazon. That was it.
Oh.
Really great. So check it out on YouTube. He's given it a few different times, but
right.
And it's old, man. It's an old talk. But I remember thinking, oh my goodness, someone else gets this. That there's some parts of the cloud, and specifically around security, that the world just wasn't talking about. Later found out Andres Riancho also knew this stuff. Like so. Immediately, like that that weird thing where you feel like you're seeing something and you might be crazy because like it just feels like your spidey senses fell off. And then you find people that think like you or that have and like suddenly I have this really great team of people I could bounce ideas off of. And so I just find ways to reach out to them and be like, hey, when you did this, did you realize like, yeah, man, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, why doesn't the world like react when we talk about this? Like people just but now, fast forward a couple of years, we've seen all this progress from the cloud providers to solve some of those problems, really around credential portability, really around how we protect the cloud from these very kind of more nuanced problems, right? So whether I think Amazon's done a great, AWS specifically, the IAM team and those teams have done a great job with organizations with utilizing different context keys for solving problems. The AWS VIA context key, so AWS VIA, AWS service, which is a mouthful to say, but it is probably my favorite thing that the IAM team has released in the last year or so. It's just beautiful. It allows you to do things like source IP restriction without without having to go through the headache of everything that blows up that Amazon does on your behalf. I think you also have teams at GCP. I'd love to call out like the work that they did with GCP VPC service controls,
Yeah.
which is kind of partnered with the team who did Istio, which is probably not a coincidence, but did these ways to make the public cloud more private, right? So you can use these public cloud channels, but public cloud control plane in a private way. And those are where I think from an enterprise, from a large enterprise, maybe a regulated enterprise, you kind of have to do it. Like, and they were the things that we had, people in this industry were trying to solve with a bunch of complex, weird tweaks. And now we've got our cloud providers that actually took the problem seriously and gave us ways to make it better and better. And they're still continuing to do it. So those advanced things, I think every major enterprise or big company or even small company that's getting into it, if you have the ability to control the egress of your users, if they use a VPN, if they use a Zscaler, if you know what IP addresses they go out on,
yeah,
you can build some pretty cool restrictions inside of IAM to make sure that those are the IP addresses that your cloud allows in, meaning your control plane, your console, your when you're talking to the CLI with an IAM role or IAM user, it's coming from the right places. Those are amazing. Like that's just really, it's not perfect. Like there's no perfect anything, but it does allow us to sleep a little better at night.
Yes, it does.
Controls in place.
Yeah,
they can be built into a lot of the services, right? So where you're running compute, I know serverless containers. Like if you're running EKS or ECS or just containers in the cloud, and they're using IAM in any way, like you just put some pretty cool context keys in there that save you. If things ever do get leaked, you're probably a little safer than if those weren't there. Trust me, like it's a really cool thing.
I think so as well, and I'm glad you brought the Google Cloud thing as well, because some of us are seeing this as a reality where it's not a single cloud anymore. Or Alexander, one of my previous guests, it's a poly-cloud world now that we live in. How do you go about, like, what's your way of getting visibility across security for, like, what do you recommend? Because I'm pretty sure, and other enterprises who are listening to this, they're going, I need someone who knows Google Cloud. I need someone who knows AWS. I need someone who knows Azure in my team. Because I technically feel it's impossible to find one person who knows all of it at a deep level. It's just not practically possible. But keen to know about your experience with multi-cloud and maybe how you may be tackling some of this, or how do you view this as a challenge?
It's an extreme challenge, right? And that's someone who I would say the greater part of my 2017, 2018 life was spent trying to figure out if I could normalize Cloud X against Cloud Y, against Cloud Z, only to realize that it's not easy to do at all. They're all the same in some ways. They're like, oh, they're all kind of running this weird Zen hypervisor. They all use these same, metadata service type things. And then you get a little bit under the cover, you're like, God, they do it so different. Like, it's not super easy. Then again, it's not entirely different, but you have to kind of roll up your cloud governance, right? If you're going to say, hey, I need this as a baseline for what I need a cloud to do. I need each cloud to meet this baseline. And you're going to find one that doesn't do it a way that you like, and just push that cloud provider if you can, right? And granted, not everybody works for a huge company that has a big voice to do that. But use your voice where you can. Like, I found that inside of our cloud security community, if you will, you can usually find some troops to rally and then go have a conversation with the cloud provider, even if you aren't a big company. And hopefully that pulls weight, because they need to, most of these clouds, while it's nice that they have big enterprise customers, they're not built for big enterprise. They're built for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like I always think about the concept of a consumer account versus a enterprise account. And guess what? We use the same exact cloud, right? Like, I'm not in Gov Cloud. Like that's a different thing, or secret clouds, or whatever these other clouds are. I have no idea what they are, but I'm not in them. So it's not something I can worry about. I'm in the same cloud that every other person using AWS from their home is.
Yeah.
And it's a big challenge, right? That's crazy. And it's a big challenge for those cloud providers to think, hey, if I implement this thing that huge enterprise needs because they're regulated, it's super important. that's going to blow away all my mom and pop business, right? And that's so they have to really find those risk trade-offs like internally, and then make sure that things are optional. Because to us, sometimes things like, why in the hell can an S3 bucket be public? That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Or one of my other favorite ones is, why can Cloudfront use domain aliases that across, and a lot of this was fixed in April of 2019, but like, why could you just put any old domain inside of a Cloudfront alias when you're setting up Cloudfront? And you're like, well, there's probably someone's business who says, hey, I'm your CDN, and they're just Cloudfronting everything for you. And so they have 25 different domains that they may front, or whatever. And it's not from an account that's where the stuff is owned. And it's this as a service model, and it creates kind of this beautiful industry, right? And so, but from an enterprise perspective, like, why could someone just put our name in this thing? And we challenge. This is a great example. We challenged AWS to say, like, hey, this has become a huge problem.
Yeah.
Not only for us, but for the industry. And you can see the bug bounty payouts happening, and they put in a change that helped, right? People have to validate domain ownership via certificates. And granted, that may not be perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than not doing it. And we've been just really impressed with our ability to work with the cloud providers when we need to see those big changes.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to watch what I would say. You have kind of your incumbent cloud provider, and AWS is that cloud provider. I love people try to say that it's not, but it is. And you can see that other cloud providers have learned from, hey, AWS maybe didn't think about this thing right when they released the service, and they're having a hard time coming back to it. But they can become the differentiator in this new cloud, right? And the next GCP can probably roll out something a little faster. Maybe Azure can roll out faster. Maybe, I don't know, what IBM Cloud, if that even.
Yeah, or Oracle Cloud. I mean, I get the drift, but to your point about the cloud, the cloud governance of multiple cloud. So 2017, 2018 is when you were kind of exploring whether you can map them out and normalize them. So what's your view now about them? I guess you just are better off just having one person in the team who does Azure, one person in the team, or I mean, at least one person, or.
I don't think there's probably someone that's very deep in all the clouds, right? They're probably, I hope they're sleeping on a nice bed of money. They are the ultimate unicorn that can do everything and understand the security of all the clouds. I think it's probably of best interest to have, maybe you have a release train of all your cloud people, right? Like in an agile world, we all work really close together, but they are separate teams. You have separate pizza box teams for each of those clouds, and then they need to work together from the governance perspective. The governance has to say all your clouds need to meet these things, but you have the specialists in certain areas, and eventually I think people should cross-train, right, to understand a little bit about, hey, how this other cloud solved this problem. I think I was fortunate enough to be part of a team that tried to do it all for a while, so I have a little bit of perspective, but not a lot. I would advise. I feel like I did a lot of name dropping, and that wasn't necessarily on purpose. I love that the community. Everything I know is because I know somebody way smarter than me that taught me something. But when looking into the multi-cloud thing, I can't recommend following Rich Mogul enough. If nothing more, just to see the stress that it induces on him to try to get some of these other clouds to do what the other cloud already does. Because he's follow him on Twitter, right? It's funny. He's like, and just read like some of the rants of like, I can't believe this thing doesn't work this way. And I'm always like, it's good to know that going in, right? Or if like, hey, or how did I miss that challenge when I looked at that thing before, right? So, use your resources, look at what other people are doing. I think if I was trying to think of anyone that's trying to do a lot in Azure and a lot in AWS and some in GCP, it's probably Rich and the Disrupt Ops team. Like I'm watching them do it. It's pretty intense. So learning, and those guys are helping push the industry to where there will never be standardization, right? I think it doesn't exist in cloud.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting. To your point, a lot of us, or at least a lot of the organizations that we look around us, they're definitely quite deep in one cloud provider and have bits and pieces of the other. Yeah. But technically, it's still, from a security perspective, it's still a polycloud or a multi-cloud problem. Yeah. Because you're like, I don't want to completely, it's maybe minimal, but I still want to have some visibility on it as well. not completely let that go.
Well, you're going to find your differentiators, right? So there may be something that exists in that cloud that you need or that works better. Or, I think a long time BigQuery was that thing, right? Like everybody
Yes.
BigQuery out of GCP. So you had to figure out like, well, how do I get that? They want to use BigQuery for this. And then, finding Amazon coming up to par, or at least like getting something that competed with BigQuery took a while. So there's like that model of like, hey, I'm going to use each cloud for this. What is it? Recognition? Is that what it's called?
Yes, recognition. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another big one, right? Everybody wanted, hey, I'm doing some, I need recognition. It does this thing for me. So there's that kind of differentiation model, and then you have the big challengers, and I think a lot of you'll see the monitoring companies that write about this, and I think the guys, a lot of the HashiCorps, et cetera, the world are trying to solve these problems now. Is like, how do I operate my service across all clouds at the same time? And that is extremely challenging, but possible. And I think it will, because there's no consistency between clouds, like even the way they implement encryption, et cetera, either you're going to have to find a common service bus or common service layer for everything to be translated to.
Yeah.
Or you're going to just have to, as things exit Cloud X, you have to realize they do this thing that means they can be used by Cloud Y. And it's not necessarily translation, but finding the lowest common denominator, or at least you can use, right? And using the constructs of the internet for what they are. Use your TLS effectively.
I feel like this is kind of where the whole service-oriented architecture kind of came in from as well, where to point what you basically said, BigQuery, all right, Google Cloud is amazing for BigQuery. Redshift is shit. But at least I don't know anymore. But the last time I worked on Redshift was very clunky compared to something start. You just want something start quickly.
Yeah.
So it may have changed. So this information maybe still going in that direction where exactly what you said, because it's a very, you're not using a Swiss knife anymore. That's like AWS is my Swiss knife. You almost have, this is my chef knife for BigQuery. This is another knife for like my bread knife for AWS. And like, it's going to be really interesting as we go deeper into this and how it kind of transforms. And I think I've got a comment here from Paul as well, just to say AWS organization is a very elegant solution relative to Azure. Azure resource group of subscriptions or GCP groups. This is actually obvious when you see some of the crazy IAM contortions that companies do to make multiple AWS account work well. Oh yeah, identity across multiple resources and multiple clouds. There's so many layers to identity these days. I think back in the day, you just want single sign-on to different services, great, or OAuth. Then like now it just, there's so many layers to this.
I think my comment to Paul there, and I kind of worked this in earlier when I saw he made the comment, was like, this just has to do with AWS was older. I mean, it's been around longer, so to go back and implement that change is probably why organization seems more like a bolt-on, because it is. And the other cloud providers, one is, Azure, to their credit, they use some of the constructs that we're all familiar with from an AD perspective, and what AD has become in the last 10 years or so, to say like, hey, let's just use this way, and we can break down things in no use structure. And largely that's what all the other cloud providers are now doing, including AWS. But it is a bolt-on, but it works. Trust me, it's better than not having it. It is a beautiful thing. So
yeah, and I think
every IAM thing is an IAM contortion, by the way. So AWS IAM policy is its own art. It really, really is. So
yeah, and imagine the number of tools that have been just created just for that. And I feel it's really fascinating that a lot of people still haven't been, like, I think if you look at Pings or Oktas of the world, I don't think they can solve that problem as well. I mean, identity itself is so complex. And then you add accountability when resources don't exist. And I feel like it's really interesting world for identity moving forward.
It is. Yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunity to keep pushing and finding solutions that maybe they become that service bus, or maybe that translation layer, that gateway, or IAM gateway that's able to speak to all clouds. I think, we saw promise from CASB's and other kinds of solutions that were going to come do these things for us. But, and not to say that they didn't solve some of those problems, but they definitely didn't do it in a cloud native way, in my opinion. Like, literally the service that the cloud provided you didn't work anymore unless you did it the way that the CASB could actually understand it. and they've come a long way. So I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's these are hard problems to solve, and lack of
Yeah,
tough.
yeah.
You
And I
just
think complexity kind of grows the more organization gets deeper into a cloud. And to Paul's point earlier as well, it's multiple AWS accounts, and you add Azure in the mix, you sprinkle some Google Cloud, then someone just brought an IBM Cloud, an Oracle Cloud. You're like, oh, great. I might as well just throw a towel in this and just walk away from this.
yeah. I do think it's imperative on organizations to just kind of decide, pick the way that they're going to approach things. Probably pick a cloud that makes the most sense for you. It doesn't matter. It honestly doesn't matter which one, but pick one. And then think about the differentiated services you might need from a few of them, but be really hesitant to just say like, hey, I'm gonna let team X go ahead and decide to use IBM Cloud this week because they have somebody on their team that thought that was cool for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's just going that can spiral out of control really, really quickly. And there's nothing that rolls every kind of cloud up the way we wish they did. Like CASBs might be able to help you detect all the clouds you're using.
Yep.
Or you definitely the control suite and keeping up with the amount of API changes and what new clouds come out this week. I would highly recommend building some guardrails to keep people from operating in clouds where you don't see a good opportunity for business differentiation. So I sort of maybe against what I said earlier, like I want people to be creative and whatever, but from trying to keep your understanding within your control and not overwhelming your people, try to minimize how many different cloud providers you're using, if at all possible.
Yeah.
That would be good. Simple advice, and most people would probably agree. Right?
Yeah, 100% with you on that. I think we're on the tail end of our show as well. And I've got 3 fun questions for you so people can get to know the other side of Houston as well. First, what do you spend most time on when you're not working on cloud or tech?
So I do still ride my skateboard, not as much as I used to, but most of my time is definitely spent with kids. So I think not enough time. Like I still regret every minute I'm not spending with them. You work way too much. I think that's probably a pretty common sentiment across our industry.
Yep.
I tinker. This is kind of interesting. I tinker with cars. I guess I'm a closet car person. Like I'm not like going to car meets, and I don't wear like car t-shirts or anything. But
right.
I like playing with. I'd say the reason I like cars is because it's unlike our jobs. I can take something apart and put it back together, and I'll break stuff and things won't work right, but I find a solution to that problem. But it seems much more finite. Like you can finish a project pretty easy. Yeah, I changed this thing or I did this, whatever. So I do find myself getting lost in those projects because I think they're more mindless, right? I like mindless projects that I feel like I can accomplish things. So I do a lot of that. Studying, I guess studying kind of counts as work, so I don't know.
Well, I was gonna ask, with your skateboard, is that one of those electric skateboards or like the push ones?
Definitely a push skateboard. So not a longboard or not a gimmick board or anything like that. It's like I ride real skateboards. I've been doing it.
Right, like a longboard?
No, like a real like normal skateboard, nose and tail.
Right. So
I skate bowls. I skate street stuff like ledges. I love curbs. I'm like really. I'm getting old, so curbs are just the thing I skate. And
perfect.
Yeah, so it's a thing. It's sort of a culture, and I've been doing it for like 30 some odd years now.
Right. Wow.
Amazing. And my body is hurt. I'm not a small young person anymore. My body definitely aches. My knees hurt a lot. But I love it. It's the culture I grew up with. I still have lifelong friends all over the world. We've skateboarded together at one time or another. So it's
that is awesome.
It's a big part of what I do. So
yeah, that's awesome because I think as an adult trying to learn skateboarding, I can tell you it's not easy.
Yeah.
Like I always fascinated I had this dream about riding a skateboard as a kid. Didn't do it as a kid. Tried learning it as an adult. Oh my god, I'm so like, for lack of better, I'm shit scared sometimes. And like in my head, it's going so fast. But when you look at the video, I'm like really glazedly, like it's like I'm so slow. Like. Yeah, I've got my own challenges with that, I guess.
I've been doing it for 30 some odd years, and still in my head, I look like something, and then I see clips of me and stuff like, Yeah, I guess that's okay. That's not what I thought it would look like. But you know, we're our own worst critics, and it is tough. I can tell you, I've been doing it forever. I skateboard better than I walk. I guarantee. I get hurt walking, but I could skate. I get hurt skateboarding too, but not like I do walking. So it's just funny. It's you know. Yeah,
I might take tips from you on skateboarding after this. Then I think I'll definitely do that. The next question that I have is, what are you proud of, which is not on your social media?
Ooh, that's a weird one. So I'm not super big on social media for the like.
Yes.
I don't over communicate anyways. But
It's usually, so a lot of people talk about their family, the kids, and to your point, I mean, I guess the things that, a lot of careers moves they would have done that's changed their life kind of a thing. So I know it's a bit of a deep question, but it's an interesting one. I find that because a lot of people technically seem to be more on social media these days because, unfortunately because of LinkedIn and stuff now, everyone kind of has to be there.
Yeah. But I think there's probably a lot about me that I think, I'm not saying I'm a super private person or trying to hide anything, but I don't rush out and tell crazy stories on LinkedIn or on Facebook, etc. I do enjoy reading people's lives and staying in touch with my relatives and stuff that way, but it's not something I really rush to do. I think something that you wouldn't know, I guess, about me that I am super proud of is my sister.
All right.
So she's 9 years younger than me, so we're pretty far apart. But she is an amazing person. She's in the U.S. military. She has you stayed in the military, will probably retire in the military, and is working in ranks. So she's constantly getting new accolades and awards, and she's a real leader.
Wow.
Just a total different background than me. Like she's not that she can't use a computer or anything. She's not a computer person. She's not.
Right.
We still lean on each other. So here's something you wouldn't know about Houston, especially on some people know this about me, but not many. I've never shot a gun in my life, right? Like I just don't. I'm in Texas. My name is Houston. People would probably.
I was gonna say, like, you've been in Texas and you've never shot a gun.
Yeah, so I'm not a cowboy, right? At all. I guess I'm somewhat of a pacifist, although I never thought of myself that way. I've been in fistfights, but I've just never shot a gun. It's kind of interesting things. And I'm not saying that I don't own a gun. I'm definitely not saying that, but it's like I don't. It's not something I'm super into, right? And so I have a lot of friends that are really, really into it. It's kind of interesting to see because it's different than my culture, like the way I am. I'm also a vegetarian, right? Like I guess I sound like a hippie all of a sudden.
Oh, that was gonna be my next question. Like, so what's your favorite restaurant cuisine? So, what's your favorite vegetarian cuisine?
So I eat a lot of black beans and rice. So just different Mexican food or El Salvadorian food. I eat a ton of Indian food, like Thai food. Pretty much all your standard vegetarian answers, probably.
Oh yeah, is you have a favorite?
I'd say that like a good Thai curry is hard to beat.
Oh yeah, like a green. Wait, do you guys get like a green or a yellow curry? Do you guys gonna which
green, curry, red curry? So I'm more of a red curry person, red or green. Yellow is where I started with curries, I think. But I think I've chilled out into like a nice, really spicy red curry.
Yes, that definitely. I mean, if you get a good one, it's funny. For a long time, my go-to was Thai fried rice with an fried egg on top.
Nice.
And I did not know this, but because I've never been to Thailand, but a friend of mine went to Thailand and he said, "Dude, you should try this." Like, because people would just order Thai fried rice. At least in Melbourne, they were ordering it, but no one would ask for the egg.
Yeah.
And I did not know it's a very Thai thing to do. Like when you order Thai fried rice, if you ask for a fried egg on top, that's a very Thai thing to do. The moment you do that and like, oh, you've been to Thailand, I'm like, I mean, no, I haven't, but someone told me it's a good thing to try. And that stuff is so addictive, I must say. It's like you add another layer. But I can keep going on about this, but I want to say thank you so much for coming in. And I really appreciate all the insight that you've given. I'm pretty sure everyone else enjoyed it as well. Where can people get in touch with you if they have any follow-up questions?
Probably the best place to find me is on Twitter. I'm at HHOPK. which is like my name. It's the first name and then the first few letters of my last name. So you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. You can find Houston Hopkins on LinkedIn. I'm not hiding. I once used to be a top Google hit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you search Houston and Hopkins, I was the first hit, and it was me skateboarding, which is really beautiful. But then the Houston Texans football team had a player with the last name Hopkins. He's now left the Texans, so maybe I have a chance to fight my way back up there.
Oh, that's why. Because when I was looking for images, it came up with someone from the American football. I'm like, who is this guy? And I'm like, oh, right. Okay, yeah, he's definitely all over the internet as well. Yeah.
And he's an amazing football player, so he deserves it. I'm not knocking him, but yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm probably LinkedIn and Twitter, probably the easiest ways to get a hold of me.
Perfect. Now, thank you so much again. And to be honest, I can't wait to bring you back in again, man. I think we definitely have to have some more conversations, probably about skateboard and imposter syndrome and life as well. But thanks again for coming in on the show.
Cool, my pleasure, Ashish. Yeah, thanks everybody.